Hello, welcome to this week's episode of the Urban Manifesto. This year, we've seen great disruptions, including redrawing of the economic map, renewing and revival of cities to meet the new context of this pandemic. And we believe that this crisis is an opportunity for urban planners and entrepreneurs to build back better. And in the Urban Manifesto series, we will offer insights and vision plans for better urban futures. And we are always thrilled to host this in partnership with Architecture Foundation, who are live streaming each episode. I'm Pratima Manohar, founder of the Urban Vision, and I'm so thrilled to co-host this series with my colleague Lucy Bullivant, who is the founder of the webzine Urbanista. Lucy?
Thank you very much, Pratima, and hello, everybody. I am going to tell you that today's theme is called Placemaking with and for Local Business Communities. So basically what that means is we're going to be looking at the creative drivers of the productive city. All cities have to be productive. They always were, they always will be as conurbations. So that means how through ingenious placemaking, creative business strategies can transcend the damage that they've experienced as we transition through the COVID crisis into a new era of far more versatile and livable urban places. And so to discuss this theme, I'm really delighted to welcome our standard guest, Andrew Sissons, who's Managing Director of which is his leading consultancy firm based in London, and works with developers, local authorities, businesses, and local communities to drive key infrastructure and development projects. At Hackney Council, Andrew led one of the most innovative economic development departments in local government, overseeing the development and the creation of Tech City, Dalston Junction, and the Hackney Fashion Hub, amongst them. His satisfied clients have variously described him as a major catalyst in the facilitation and evolution of East London, as possessing an invaluable skill in developing public sector policy while also successfully driving commercial enterprise, and someone with a great eye for the details in the complex process of unifying diverse stakeholders. Now, London is a very mixed and diverse city, which has also lost quite a lot of its industrial space to housing developments, around over 16% over the last 15 years, and a further 10% or so is threatened by planning permissions granted, well over the annual benchmark set by local government. One of my urbanist friends, Mark Brearley, 3 years ago called this process an accelerated suburbanization of London's economy. So now across all sectors, the outbreak of COVID has caused severe threats to the stability of local businesses, especially ones in the cultural sectors relying on live performances, wherever they operate in the metropolis, and mirroring the impact of this across the world. And here, the threat of the UK crashing out of the EU with a no-deal Brexit, we pray it will not happen. But this issue makes it all the more important that we have enough creative, resilient business clusters, dynamic, civic, mixed, and accessible. So questions we're going to look at include, how can we harness creative business potential as part of the city's livable urbanism and fully nurture the right kinds of public-private partnerships to be real lifelines in this respect? And do we have a sufficiently strong and subtle planning system to help enable all this, as the Guardian's architecture correspondent Oliver Wainwright put it in his article about this theme actually a few years ago. So in Urban Manifesto, if you watch us regularly, we don't look at trends alone. We analyze why things are happening and what can most productively be done about them. So with the future of the productive city at stake, Andrew has more than a few tried and tested strategies and other valuable ideas we're really looking forward to hearing more about. But before we kick off with your manifesto points, Andrew, we always ask our guests is how have you been managing during the pandemic?
Oh, not bad at all, actually. I feel sometimes I feel a bit strange saying this when you see so many of my friends, having difficulties trying to run their business at the moment. But we've seemed to have had record month after month, and we kind of hit our targets for the year by July. And so then I'd, like, being the typical horrible boss that I am, I'd reset the targets again to the end of the year, and then we've done that target again. And so we're having another go at what the year's target really should be. But we're finding the development community is still being very bold and trying to take forward schemes that they've already started. We've done a fair bit of work looking at schemes where people think that the ground floor probably doesn't quite work in locations where they put in place plans already. So we're starting to look at revising some of those. Local authorities have been, very good in terms of commissioning work, and we've been doing lots of borough-wide social economic strategies and employment land studies in various locations across London. So, yeah, by and by, it's been a really good year, touch wood. And I just hope that it really improves for all my friends. That's the most important thing now. I want to see, London's creative businesses and restaurants and bars and cultural venues. I really want to see those guys start to be able to bounce back now. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. I completely, we all completely agree with you on that. We really hope so. So that's brilliant, fantastic, positive outlook for your business, and it's so needed that you're thriving rather than only surviving. So over to you, Andrew. Give us your manifesto points.
Yes.
Placemaking with and for local business communities.
Yeah, so our first one is, do you like our jazzy new logo, by the way? We just changed our name. I thought it was good to move away from Andrew Sissons Consulting because some of my clients were concerned that you go, is it only you? And I didn't want it to be like that. I want it to represent the lots of people who've started to work for us these days. So we just shortened it down to AND, which means which means and regeneration and strategy and leasing and all of the various things that we get involved in. So one of the first people to see our new logo. So if we
that's very nice.
Someone told me we should turn it into T-shirts. It was a bit of a fashion-like kind of print. So our first one is, and this is something that is a huge part of our business, is around industrial transformation. I always feel, industrial architecture has always been the poor relation of architecture and placemaking. We never create great places where people want to walk through and want to look at and want to see the theatre of industry. And you were so right in what you were saying in the opening section around losing so much industrial space. It's and especially at a period of time where the only real growth sector at the moment within commercial property is the industrial sector. We're seeing people still starting businesses at the moment, people who are makers or have had a hobby or forming a craft business and trying to grow it from there. So we're really interested in delivering intensified statement architecture and public realm within industrial estates and locations, and create places that people really want to visit and walk through and not just work at. It's we also want to transform these industrial locations into really dynamic economic clusters that contribute to place in the widest possible sense. And from my view, occupiers of industrial locations don't just want to be in a mono tenure environment with similar businesses. They want to see people who create, who brand, who do other parts of the process to be there with them and to create much more interesting environments that, you know, make a real contribution. So it's something that's really excited us for a long time. It's a big part of our work in helping to transform industrial locations and trying to, where they have been bought by house builders, to create space that does come back, that is still industrial or maker in its nature, and provides a space where, you know, that kind of business can still happen on the ground floors. And, you know, too often I feel that people's default position on the ground floor of a scheme is just to put retail space or just, you know, additional restaurants and stuff like that. But I think really great maker space can create just as much theatre, can continue to create retail opportunities. Makers don't want to have a second shop. They want to be able to retail from their maker space. So we're really passionate about all different forms of industrial transformation and how to create really great places where business and commerce can happen and different types of business can collide. And I think we put a few pictures in our deck where you can see these are some schemes that we're working on at the moment. This is one that we're actually working on the design of with HWO architects, who are really great mixed use architects. But I felt they'd be really good at working with us on the industrial product. And so this is a product where I can't really say the location, but it's somewhere where we need to replace large format industrial units on the ground floor of the development and replace what was already there. But then didn't just want that to just be fresh air up above. We wanted to create lots more volume, lots more intensification to actually make the location viable and to be able to build this. So going up through the building, you have a series of lighter uses till you get to the top floors, which are actually micro maker spaces, which is a kind of real phenomenon that we've been picking up on over the last year or half or so, where businesses that are starting want very small spaces, 25, 30 square meters, but with shared facilities and shared meeting rooms and spaces where they can come together and be a part of a really interesting and dynamic business community. So this is something that we're just working on the design of at the moment, where it has a commercial courtyard. All of those big industrial functions can continue to happen on the ground floor, but going through the building, accessed by a series of goods lifts, you have access to further different typologies of maker and industrial space that can be clustered and built over a number of floors. And I think in this country we've been very poor at adopting stacked industrial. And I think now in inner London, if businesses want to be able to continue to operate here, they're going to need to embrace stacked industrial. So we just put a few examples of the kind of schemes that we're working on at the moment, so we can carry on rolling through the pictures. This is externally and some very early images of. So there's two different typologies there. One is all of them are about putting heavy use industrial on the ground floor, and then different formats of workspace up above that. Our second manifesto commitment was around lively places, and I think this also kind of fits into something industrial. I think through my years when I was head of regeneration at Hackney, I noticed that people the first pioneers who turned up in Hackney worked there because they could make lots of noise, they could have bars, clubs. It was very lively and exciting, and people could bash around, and music producers loved it because they could have their music up really loud and they could have people performing and recording there. And that's the sort of thing that needs to happen in city centres to build these creative communities that we're all trying to have across the country and across the world. And I think as we've started to have much more mixed use city centres, we've got more residential in there, and there's more problems as people start to make noise. People who live there obviously get unhappy about it. It hasn't been planned perfectly, and the mass migration into cities has been very difficult for planners to achieve with great deals of success. So lively places and places where people can make noise, I think, are really important. And I think if we go through some of the slides, these are some, I now think that some of this sort of thing should happen on industrial estates. If we start to intensify upwards with industrial products, this is one we've been working on with Be First Embarking, which is really exciting. A great intensified stack scheme. But I think this also starts to free up some space to be able to put other uses in there. And if we want to create permeable, attractive places that people want to visit, we need to put other uses that fit well with an industrial type offer. So by weekend, these won't be used so much for industrial uses. Why can't we put other forms of leisure in there? What isn't it a middle of an industrial estate somewhere probably the best place to put a large-scale nightclub or a music venue or other types of leisure venues, like bouldering centres, big yoga facilities, street food, all of this sort of stuff. As long as we can get the footfall there, make it safe and attractive, we should be using these locations much more intensively, not just for industrial, but to bring other forms of uses that live happily and close by and where people can make noise. I mean, we've become a bit of a city that's a bit NIMBY-ish and doesn't take account that young people, certain people in different industries, all want to make some noise and want to do the things that we all did when we were young. And it's such a shame that these locations no longer exist as you were right. The suburbification of London takes hold, and places become more difficult to do these exciting things that make such big contributions to the city. So we put a few more pictures in here if we carry on sliding through of, this is the drum sheds in Enfield. Fair play to Enfield Council. They, on Meridian Water, put a 10,000 capacity nightclub. And, that just doesn't happen much in London anymore. And places like this, which is so sad it can't be used at the moment, last year had a fantastic amount of different and very varied events went on through the course of the year that are just very difficult to put on in London. As we lose music venues, as we lose nightclubs, we should be using these big locations that are either meanwhile or even permanently, like what can happen on industrial locations for this type of use. So brilliant work by Enfield Council. I can't remember what the next slide was. This is just showing you some of the kinds of small space that we think, this is what people want. This is Poplar Works in Poplar, where the brilliant housing association, Poplar Harker, have started to build some great little workspaces for fashion and for creative people, and they're right next to an A road, and they're a buffer between an A road and the estate, and people can get on and do things within them. And the fuel tank is where we're based here down in lovely Deptford, and again The buildings at the front are all about commercial, and you can, we got record labels in here, we got recording artists, we got artists, and all different types of people here who can all get on and do what they do best. So we need much more of this type of space. And this is just showing you what happens across Europe. They're so good at doing stacked products, and occupiers are really excited by them and use them. They're full, they operate. It's a great way of being able to keep this type of product in the centre of cities. So there are just a couple of slides here that we can roll through of really great buildings across Europe. Switzerland and France are particularly good at this. I mean, that one looks like the Pompidou, isn't it? But it's actually an industrial building. Fantastic. That's what we want to see more of. And then our third point, which slightly diverges from the other two, is really about the power of food and how important it is, and how we can use food as such a powerful agent for delivering regeneration in our cities. And I don't think we do very well to coordinate it at the moment. I think we can really do a much better job about promoting localism and sustainability. So much new business has been created since 2000, since the last financial crash in 2008, where you look then, there was one microbrewery in London in 2008, 2009, and you step forward to 2020, there's now about 126. I think there were 10 gin distilleries in London. There are now about 260. And that just goes to show the change in consumer habits, the change in consumer demands, and people wanting local, sustainable products of provenance. And we can, through using food, we can create, much more jobs. We can create much more new business. We can design the city around our food needs. Why are we not using more rooftops to grow herbs and fruit and vegetables? Why are we not using more hydroponics in the city? These are ideas that we were really working on before the crash in March with restaurants. I just was looking at a lot of green roofs and thinking, why do people just put astroturf and mud up here? Why can't we fill this with herb plants and things like that? So I think local authorities could, and regional. Where is Sadiq on this? Why are we not promoting food made in London? You go to places like Cornwall and they're absolutely brilliant at promoting local produce. I've never seen Hackney or Southwark, who both are places that have got huge amounts of breweries, promoting their local offer, their London's larder or more like refrigerator for holding, creating the beer and the food and drink that people enjoy. So we really think it's important to see much more coordination, much more support across these industries, because it could be such a driver for economic growth. And we just put a few pictures. These are our French German craft down in Elephant and Castle. And then just showing, how brilliant our producers and retailers are at displaying what they do, and why can't we do much more of this? It's such an exciting area, and where we should be. There's still so much opportunity, and still people are discovering the power of local rather than multinationals. And it's I think with more coordination and putting more support behind these industries, we could really drive a lot of economic growth. I mean, even in London, places like Enfield have great big swathes of farmland. Why are we not coordinating that into more local product and making sure that we can feed the city, which is increasingly a problem? And that is it from us. I think there may have been a couple more slides. This is another brewery that we're working on at the moment. and then some really exciting street food places that such a great way to start a business and for people. And I think in this future world, people will be people won't be so keen to start great big restaurants because of the capital fit out and things like that at the moment. So street food has been a great way of people to test the business idea and then to start it and move into bricks and mortar. But can we now can we now continue to deliver more of this type of product to create employment and great things to surprise and delight people in our cities?
Andrew, thank you very much for that. That was very rich and multifaceted. I really love the idea that the brownfield industrial stated areas of London and other cities can really become creative crucibles in the way that you describe. And also, I mean, we could do a whole session in its own right on the issue of creative architectural patronage of industrial architecture. I mean, the examples you've shown are at the same time they have kind of a flamboyance, but absolute massive pragmatism to them as well. There are planning rules, but there are immense freedoms too. With particularly, I mean, stacked products are a genre, or let's say a typology that we have not so much experienced in London. But definitely, I think also this idea that we would eventually in the city, we would end up with really, really fascinating, socially intense, vibrant outer London areas, and the centre becomes completely suburban. Let's hope that that's not the case. We have to have the best of both worlds for London, and other cities need to think about that kind of balance. What I'm going to ask you first of all, because we've now got some tantalizing questions for you. Your business, Andrew, has got a slogan: embracing change, a blueprint for our cities, supporting commercial property and entrepreneurship. So if we think about public and private partnering, which obviously that needs to be in place for all of these phenomena that you've described to take place. What are your recommended action steps if we are thinking about creating these permeable dynamic economic clusters in areas particularly where they need transformation? And do you agree that context and community buy-in are absolutely king at this point? I mean, are there obstacles to unifying diverse stakeholders? I'm sure you deal with the challenges as they come up. And can partnering perfectly match in ambition the focus green industrial strategy that we also need for our economy and society?
Yeah,
that's quite a cluster of questions there, but
I'll try and remember them all. My short-term memory is never best. I think I can remember most of them.
Well, I did send them to you in advance as well, didn't I?
True. I think there are some obstacles at the moment, and do you know what? Part of the obstacles are actually the end tenant and occupiers who are very nervous of this type of product. They're like, I just drive straight up to my unit at the moment. What happens when I'm on the fourth floor? Will there be huge traffic jams and things like that? And I think it's important to look at the precedents across Europe and see how they've been able to cope with it. I think developers have also always put it in the too difficult box. But one of the good and bad things about the London plan is they're very much trying to protect industrial land. I don't always agree with how they're trying to do it, because they try and shoehorn back exactly the existing amount of space that was there before, or ask you to provide an uplift in space. And I think what is more important is to provide fit for purpose space and the right space rather than an arbitrary quantum. So whilst protecting is important, whilst re-providing or uplifting wherever possible is great. We've got to get it right in these locations and build a product that people are happy to use and to work from. I think in terms of stakeholders and the community, why would the community not want to see much nicer places than the decrepit industrial estates that you can see across various parts of London at the moment, or where railway arches are falling into, hopefully not dilapidation, but they don't look great. And trying to make these places much nicer places where people actually want to visit. And that's why we keep saying around putting different uses in there as well. Why can't we have great public realm, great public art, nature, trails, green walls, green trails through estates and stuff like that, rather than just being the usual array of sheds with like a burger van for company? It's much more important to try and build places. And I think we need a change in philosophy from all stakeholders involved in the process to make sure we can continue to deliver this. And I'm sure local communities really will buy into having much nicer, pleasanter, well-designed spaces surrounding their homes and on the outskirts of towns where these spaces normally are. It can only contribute to the betterment of the city.
Yeah, brilliant. So over to you, Prathama.
Andrew, I want to talk to you a little bit about, the economic context that we're in. The pandemic is probably the most significant economic event in our lifetime. It has probably led to the steepest economic slowdown since the Great Depression of 1930s. So, what would your advice be for stakeholders, whether it's businesses, retail businesses, commercial real estate businesses, or social enterprises, on how can they use innovative approaches and design strategies to to survive the crisis brought about by this pandemic?
Yeah, well, you mentioned before in the last question our strapline about embracing change, and that was a report we done 2 or 3 months into this whole pandemic situation, where we interviewed about 250 businesses in total, which range from very small startups through to chief execs and managing directors of big global corporate organizations, through to chief execs of councils and planning authorities and everything, to really try and understand how people were feeling, how people were coping in terms of their business, and what they thought would happen in the future. And quite a lot of it focused on people felt that this would lead to a slight change in society and very much a change in how we use cities, and particularly with people working from home and how many people will need such big offices and things like that. I think it works on a number of different levels. I mean, we need to help a lot of businesses, particularly things that we know quite well, like leisure and hospitality. We really want to see local authorities just help businesses to do what they need to do to survive, because we certainly don't want to come out the other end of this. We all get jabbed in the arm with our injection and suddenly start wandering around again. And already about 20 of my favourite places have gone, and in London, which is such a shame. And we need to help these people to be able to operate outside. And there's a cocktail bar come to me the other week and said, we're in a basement. People think basements are COVID hellholes and we never want to spend any time in basements again. we want to move upstairs. So find us somewhere on the ground floor, because the underground speakeasy is no longer where people want to be. So they were describing what they wanted to me. They goes, we want this place where we've got great big bifolds that open up. So even if people are sat inside, they feel that they're, still got fresh air circulating through the building, and, they can, comfortably have leisure time within a space like that. And they were facing problems. They found a space they wanted, but they were going through a 12, 14, 16-week planning process with local authority about changing a solid glass window to bifolds. And you're just like, wow, just help these guys. Don't make it so bureaucratic. This could lose 10 jobs if this doesn't get done properly and quickly. Also at the present point in time, hospitality people know how to look after people, and all this kind of closing down and these restrictions, I'm not so sure how good an impact they're having on people and businesses, because hospitality has spent hundreds of thousands and millions of pounds in these last few months putting together systems to be able to make people feel safe and comfortable to be able to use these places. And we're continuing to lock down, despite the evidence showing that something like only 3 or 4% of all COVID outbreaks actually happen within hospitality venues. The other thing that I think that is really interesting, and which is great, is the renaissance of outer London. Whenever I go to places like Barking, and even down here in Deptford and Greenwich, and further out in other parts of London, they're doing well. There are people on the streets, people are working where they live, and it's had for a lot of businesses, a positive impact in terms of driving new footfall and new visitors, where people would previously just go to the traditional leisure and entertainment centres in London. So it's been really positive in that sense for local areas, and has helped build more pride in your local environment. And I want to use local. I want to go and see my local shopkeeper because I've got time, and I now want to, bake my own stuff. I want to, try different forms of cooking and things like that. And so that's had a really positive impact. We are seeing people and businesses coming to us saying, I don't want to pay so much money to be in the centre of town anymore. And, we're looking at where we can relocate that's good for our staff. Well, there are some businesses that say, I'm the chief exec and I live here and I want us to be based here. So, which is funny. And so you are seeing some businesses starting to, in certain locations, move out. And, there's not many places at the moment I'd say, go and build an office there, you'll fill it, no problem. But the places now where I say, you will fill an office, are completely random and wouldn't be the case before. Like places like, if someone comes to me and says, do you reckon I could build a 50,000 square foot office in Barking? I'd say, no problem, do it. They're building so many houses, they haven't got enough infrastructure in terms of office yet. It's a growing commercial location. They've done incredible things down there in terms of attracting big ticket economic infrastructure. This is the sort of place at the moment where you should be building an office. And so it's quite strange. You're seeing a resurgence in certain outer London locations that has had a really positive impact. I do worry about, I think there will be some form of reckoning in city centre locations, in the big clusters in London, that will probably see a short to medium term drop in rent, and what impact that has nationally in terms of our economy and people's pensions and things like that is obviously a concern. And I'm sure it will come back eventually, but for short to medium and slightly beyond the medium term, I think it's going to have a really positive impact in outer locations.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. Lucy?
Yeah, so let's continue on my favorite topic, food and beverage, and I'm
Yes.
sure yours too. Yeah, why have one brand of gin when you can have 15? So before the pandemic, specialists in this field, specialists in the hospitality field, were debating whether there's a real oversupply of retail as well as food and beverage in UK towns and cities. Some people were saying it was 40% oversupplied, but most people were pointing to the fact that there are great variations in that percentage depending on where it was. But they generally agreed that repurposing built assets, whether it's high streets or redundant industrial areas, based on a clear vision of place was really the answer. So you've depicted the huge kind of, well, you call it quite rightly a renaissance, the creative agency of food and beverage to help catalyze urban regeneration. In your, let's say, in your travels around the world, you depict some of the places where you feel it's been successful. But I mean, where do you think it has worked really well, and why is that? Is there a one formula, or does it always have to be really bespoke?
No, I don't think there's one formula at all. I think things like emerge mainly through the private sector, and you look at great places like Maltby Street and Notting Hill and Broadway Market and what's happened in Shoreditch, locations like that. It's very much been driven by the private sector locating to those places and creating, absolutely brilliant destinations that attract millions of people. And quite often, I think the local authority hasn't been out in front of that. It's all they've eventually got there and helped to shape and protect when they start to become major destinations. But I do think you are absolutely right on the fact that we provide too much retail and F&B space, and it's something that the development community is predominantly responsible for, I think, which is, and maybe local plans as well, where retail and restaurant is always the default to put underneath new schemes, and perhaps we should have a more strategic approach to that. Why, in certain locations, I've turned around regularly to developers and said, why do you want to put another 15 shops here? There's like 80 over there already. 12 of them are empty. There's bound to be a few more casualties. This is pre-COVID, and that before it started to speed up the already structural faults within certain sectors in retail, food, and leisure. And maybe we need to have, if a developer is saying, right, I'm going to build these 200 homes and I'm going to build these 20 shops underneath, they have to really justify why there is a need for those 20 shops. Because quite often you could say, well, this would be much better as maker space, or we could have this form of commercial, or we could do something more leisure focused, or there might be something that the community really needs. It's always we always just seem to default on a lot of schemes and re-provide retail as just that's what we do. There's no real kind of consideration as to what that is going to add to an area, or whether it's going to take away from a main centre or something like that. I think we got to see local authorities being, and maybe even the GLA saying, right, if you're building, X quantum of commercial on the ground floor, you've got to justify why you're doing it and set out your strategy as to why it's needed and what impact and what economic growth that's going to lead to in the future. We just blindly in certain locations just put retail on the ground floor when we really don't need it.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you that we need to review, we need to look at this, perceive it as social infrastructure. There's a really, and that underlines the argument for having a much wider range of stakeholders. For example, including mutual aid societies and so on. Yeah, that's really interesting. Prathima?
Andrea, one of the things that I want to press you a little bit more about is that obviously we're seeing a ton of interest around the world to rebuild local economies and create a community, social life, and obviously strong food cultures, local food cultures. It's crucial to this agenda. Give us some kind of advice on this. How do we optimally design urban places to generate productive food cultures? Is it via meanwhile strategies, or strategic industrial repurposing, or how do we create this mix of local and more far flung visitor kind of footfall in these areas?
I think every place, every borough, or at different levels in other authorities, as cities or towns, should have someone that's holding the ring on this for their area and fighting for local products and localism and just really understanding that there's such a dramatic shift in consumer demands around sustainability and local product and, and making sure that everything is as sustainable as possible. And I don't think we do that yet in terms of making life easy for people to open these types of business. And I think if we can do more around, making sure that we get those basics in place just as much as the end user who buys all these products and sells them to the consumer, in terms of the restaurants and creating places like that. That's absolutely vital. And why we don't really get our heads around how powerful this could be as an economic driver for places where you can show real pride in your local product. You can do great things in terms of reducing carbon footprints and creating sustainability. How we can promote areas, restaurants collectively, and things like that to make sure that people know about the power of these places. There are certain places across London which is the example I know best, where people really don't completely know the offer and the opportunity there. Like places like Enfield have a great Turkish restaurant community, and like down Green Lanes as well. And why they should be promoting themselves just as well as Chinatown does, and Brick Lane and places like that. So I think there's a lot that can be done at a local level to be able to support that. And I think everything kind of starts with a food strategy, but it encompasses everything from farming to manufacturing and production, through to how it's sold on the street, how waste is used properly to be able to continue to make us more sustainable and carbon neutral, through to how we build that narrative and that brand around the offer in our locations. And maybe that we should be doing that at a wider London level as well, to talk to the rest of the world, particularly in this in the new Brexit world that we've all got to accept. Is that we need to be exporting our products more, we need to be doing it better, and we need to be showcasing what we're all about and how we can supply different economies with things that they don't have. So it's very much at a strategic level. I think we do all of these things brilliantly, and in lots of isolation, but it would be really fascinating to see how much more growth could be driven if we really tried to coordinate it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Strategy for revival of the local economies. Thanks, Andrew.
Andrew, I'm really keen to ask you now about creating lively places where people can make lots of creative noise in.
Yeah.
Do you, and you flagged up wonderful examples like jump sheds at Meridian Water in Enfield and various other wonderful venues that we hope to be going to very soon. Do you think that in London we have a principle that is known as agents of change, which means that if you introduce a new land use, you're responsible for managing the impact of that change on people and the environment and so on. Do you think that the influence of that has really helped encourage and nurture lively places people can make noise in? And are we ever going to be free from NIMBYism?
No. So it always reminds me of my favourite story about this is when I was at Hackney, and when Shoreditch started to become a very popular place for people to live.
Yeah.
All of the kind of masters of the universe bankers thought, I'm going to have a place in Shoreditch rather than travelling from Richmond. And obviously, quite a few of them are so busy trading and whatnot by day, they probably outsourced their house buying to other people. And this chap bought a house or a penthouse flat right next to Cargo nightclub in Shoreditch. And I think he moved in, and it was all well and good on like Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Thursday night at about 11 o'clock at night, it's suddenly a boom, 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 boom. I get emails pouring into my account overnight. It obviously researched who I was, found me. About 2 days later, I got a letter from, I think it was Farrer, the Queen's lawyers, threatening a cease and desist against this nightclub, and that they need to. They've been there for 20 years. This guy had moved in 2 weeks ago into a city centre to chop down his travel time and was trying to close the place down. And I've got friends who own pubs that have been in place for 300 or 400 years in London, and still people on the same streets who moved in weeks ago are saying, the noise here has to stop and things like that. Of course, there's got to be a balance around this, but I think we need to plan places a little bit better. And when we've got an opportunity, I'm looking at one scheme at the moment, which is a vast tract of land, and I've said to the people who own it, you can have some fun here as well as doing what we've got to do. We could create something where, that's really missing in London at the moment, where people can really, do interesting things and create a very young place. We always talk about city centres as being quite young places, but they're not really, because people aren't allowed to do what they were able to do in them many years ago. So we're kind of trying to carve off a corner that's close to the railway line and got boundaries of other stuff on other sides, and trying to be able to do something that's really fun and be really attractive in a location that's not established at the moment. There are very few places. Places like Hackney Wick are still great for having late night licenses, and Tower Hamlets have been very good at granting that. But I expect it's now got to the stage where so many houses are turning up, it's starting to, have an impact as the people that move in there don't necessarily, people who can afford a £700,000 house probably normally or flat aren't normally still up at 2 o'clock in the morning. They've got to go and earn the money to be able to afford a place like that. So I think creating some places where people can do that, and appreciating that we're in city centres. I mean, one of the worst things I see all the time is I don't think there's a roof terrace in London that's allowed to be open after 10 o'clock. You have to, a lovely summer's day, all of a sudden at 10 o'clock, the poor harassed security guard is wandering around telling everybody to go and sit inside. And it just, it spoils an element of the fun of being able to live in the city. You want to be on those rooftops, and actually I can think of one. I think Sushi Samba in the middle of the city. I think that's open quite late at night, but I can't think of many examples where those places and beer gardens and outside areas of restaurants where there's residential above. You have to normally be inside by 10 o'clock, and it's such a shame. We're a 24-hour city, and yeah, I mean, there will be cases of people making noise, but that is always going to be a case of living in the city. I used to live in Hackney, and there'd be an ambulance or a police car going past every 2 seconds, which creates much more noise than a few people passing by a place at midnight, and is much more constant than that as well. So just try to get that balance right of creating places where people can do that. I understand they did it with the Ministry of Sound, where they put the glazing in for the residents that move, but I'm not too sure how well that's worked and what level of complaint there is. And hopefully I would be on the side of the venue of saying, you've moved into a street where there's a 25-year established place, please respect that and respect those kind of uses, and respect what a massive impact music and club culture has on the wider creative economy of this country.
I absolutely, totally agree with you. I mean, they're really important for our emotional, physical, and spiritual health, definitely. So we look forward to having our 24-hour city back again.
We should form a political party between the three of us. We'd be elected.
Yeah, we should. Yeah. I should also ask Sadiq Khan, our lovely mayor, if he would launch London's Larder as a food and beverage brand, because I think it's, as you said, it's overdue. So Prathima, should we ask if there are any audience questions?
Yeah, I was just gonna do that, Lucy, and I just want to say hi to everyone who's joining us this evening, and please tell us where you're from, and if you have a comment or question for Andrew, please share it with us, and we will try to get him to answer at least one of them, because we're almost running out of time. But I'm just going to quickly ask one of the questions that we drafted for Andrew, which is, your vision of the productive city is, it's amazing. I mean, it's the vibrant, full of life place. Could you tell us about how businesses, which are part of this kind of framework, can also tackle environmental and social goals locally?
I think if we provide the right spaces and places, that kind of thing will come naturally. I find I work with lots of small businesses, that are makers and producers and things like that, and all of them have very serious environmental goals. Even if they're a small business, they'll say to me, and they're hiring like a 50 square meter space, they'll say, what's the environmental, what's the deal in terms of this building being climate friendly? Is it carbon neutral? What are they doing in terms of heating and cooling? Do the windows open so we can naturally cool? And they are selling a very localized product, and if we can get those into the right places, they have very strong environmental aims. And I think it's all a question of building the right kind of commercial space that people want. Makers want a space to make and a space to retail. Restaurants want to be able to have certain types of requirement in what they want from facilities, and I think a lot of environmental improvement will happen through being able to create the conditions for more localized, sustainable businesses that have got a really strong provenance in the area that they're operating from, and that will help people to transform their consumer habits as well. When people, I'm trying to think of an example. People used to like to drink a pint of mass-produced Heineken. Now people would rather have a pint of Two Tribes out of King's Cross or something like that. And the same can be said with lots of little food producers that we work with. People who now create their own pasta sauce. Why are they, which is local, sustainable? Why are they going to go and buy Dolmio that's been shipped halfway across the world? And just these little changes are going to have a massive impact. I know some of this stuff can be more expensive than the mass-produced stuff, but I genuinely think people, and this whole current situation has meant that people have a newfound appreciation of local and of sustainability and how things are made and how things get to them. And I think the bit that I understand about reaching environmental goals is very much around how small business will make a huge contribution to our wider goals.
One of the themes that we've had as part of our revival strategy for out of this economic crisis is vocal for local,
Yeah.
and to kind of push more local and authentic brands, and those are so crucial to great cities as well. So I love that vision. Lucy, last question before we wrap up because we are already over the hour.
Yeah, okay, great. Or we could even make it two if Andrew wants to do a really quick fire answer. So my question follows on directly from what you were just talking about, localization. Urbanist Greg Clark did a bit of polling of some of his European friends about the future, how they thought people would evolve their patterns of behavior and work styles. And they mostly felt in Europe, they would move towards more hybrid style between their workplace and working at home, but also including working at locations much closer to home. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, hugely. I mean, I've pitched a few things to house builders recently where I say, in this location, you should be like building oversized flats. Don't just do the standard 51 square meter one bedroom flat. Add another 10 or 15 square meters and create a really thought through kind of workspace internally within that house, or start to provide more a shared workspace as part of a development. And you're starting to see that come through, particularly in the build to rent sector that's been very good at doing that over the last couple of years. But I also completely agree in terms of people wanting to have a base closer to work. And from what I can see, and some of the leasing that we've done recently, is that people do want a small space very close to where they're based, and they want their own front door. And I don't think this is just a COVID trend. I would say this has been going on for a year and a half of people moving out of the big aircraft hangar, WeWork type by the desk spaces to having very much their own small office with their own front door, but still, want that to be part of a community with shared spaces and stuff like that. And I think that's, I completely agree with Greg. I think that's something that's going to continue to happen. I think there'll be, hopefully, house builders will start to embrace something more than, just use your second bedroom as your office. It's like, we as a business have gone completely the other way. I hated working at home during the whole lockdown process, and decided that it was absolutely the right time to rent an office rather than work from Shoreditch House or Soho House and places like that. And just, it's so important to have that separation in life, isn't it? Between, you don't want to be sat on your sofa or kitchen or working at your kitchen table, and then have to spend your evening in the same place as well. And I think that beyond that, as think the return to normal, we'll see certainly a change in what shared or managed workspace looks like, and people wanting hubs that they can visit around London as part of their day, particularly people who freelance or people like me who have to go to lots of different locations across London every day as part of in the normal world. It's, you want a more flexible product. And I spoke to quite a large company the other week that was thinking about having a much smaller central location, but picking 5 kind of hubs around the rest of London that they could have touch points for their staff and look to release a lot of their central London location. I've had conversations with other people who said, we perhaps don't want to go back to having an office. We might have a space and a place where people who have to be based from an office or a location come in, but then more of a social space and meeting rooms, etc., etc. But then we're better off getting rid of 200,000 square foot and giving everyone 500 quid a year to turn their office into something beautiful, or like get a membership to a Shoreditch house or something like that. So I think there's going to be a lot of changes around that. We're only really at the start of this process and being able to understand it, but I think it will lead to long-term structural changes, particularly in those massive requirements. I look out the window here at Canary Wharf, and you wonder like how many of those towers at the top end, what will everyone return to them? Will there need to be other uses put into those buildings? Will work change in such a way that all the desks are shipped out and the spaces are used in very different ways? It's really exciting.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much for your insights. I almost feel as though you and I, how would we get this to Prathima? You and I, we could have been drinking one of a choice of London craft ale or something, craft beer,
Yeah.
How would Prathima come in that?
Yeah, I hope that we can do that soon, because
post it to her.
Yeah.
Care package.
Yeah, exactly. No, we wouldn't post it. We'd courier.
Yeah.
I just want to say, Andrew, that I think the agenda of productive city will be at the heart of the regeneration post this economic crisis. And I hope that, it'll enable locals to participate in economic development and progress, because I think a lot of what was happening pre-COVID was not working for everybody. And to see localization and bringing back local authentic cultures and local markets is such an amazing and hopeful roadmap to our urban future. So I really enjoyed this conversation. And my final question, and it'll be a quick kind of answer from you, but
Okay.
what are the 3 big policy ideas to drive this agenda for local governments all over? What should they do to, just kind of spur this movement of productive cities? And then we will let you go. I know we're out of time, but we
That's
can get some quick ideas for driving change.
I think I'd like to see some slight amendments to the certainly from my perspective, and where 80% of our work at the moment is in London. I'd like to see the London plan become more flexible, particularly around the industrial policy that we were talking about earlier. I want the Mayor of London and Jules Pike to really say, yeah, we're going to protect this in London. It's absolutely critical for creating open supply chains and making sure product can be made in London, but not being so prescriptive around the way they manage the policy. And I think that would be a great help to everybody. We do need to free up some land for housing. If we can adopt this stacked mentality in London, we can build upwards and free up more land for housing. So that would certainly be one. I think the second one is definitely, I suppose I'm just going to go back to my manifesto, is really around making sure everywhere has a food champion or someone that really starts to coordinate this massive effort and massive amount of business and a huge part of our economy. You can see why our economy has struggled these last few months is because so much of it is within these sectors that are not able to be productive at the moment. And if there were a few people across London whose job actually was to really focus and help these people, we might be in a better space at the moment. Thirdly, I mean, I think making sure that city centres can be city centres. I think there's going to have to be some sort of change because they won't return as they were in the past. Certainly in the short to medium term. And what are we going to do to make those places be attractive and want to go back to them? I really do. I'm chomping at the bit to go to certain places that I want to go across London, and we've got to. We always work in policy frameworks at the moment, and now isn't the time to have long-term policies. Policies need to be. God, the world moves so fast. The policy needs to be reviewed every half an hour at the moment. I know that's not possible, but we can't have 10-year strategies at the moment. We need to get us out of this terrible situation in certain industries. We need to be working on their time frames and being very quick to be able to support them. We've got to obviously do the right things around making sure that they're providing safe and good products and stuff like that, but being able to, we need to respond in a time frame that helps business, because we're going to be in real trouble if another million or two people lose their job in this country at the moment. So getting policy to move quicker, even if it's just as an emergency thing for the next 3 years, around things like planning, around things like town centre and city centre management and products and safety and all of that sort of stuff. We've got to move it a lot quicker.
Thank you.
I completely agree with you.
I'm going to let you go. Lucy.
Yeah, I was just sorry. I was going to just quickly agree with you that we need to go literally week by week, month by month, and have more seasonal strategies, which in a way would actually make huge sense in terms of the productive city thinking of growing, food growing, food production, and so on, using the metaphor of growing. If we work seasonally, because the pandemic is going to be our response to the pandemic is going to change month by month at the same time.
Yeah,
it's much more tactical urbanism that is a huge value at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great phrase. I'm going to nick that.
Well, aren't you a master of tactical urbanism?
I've never called it that before. I just said, let's do this.
We have a whole episode on tactical urbanism. We can send you the link to.
Yeah, I think I need to see that. That sounds good.
That's an American, Mike Lydon, American planner who's a tactical urbanist specialist.
Yeah.
Really good.
I mean, it's so vital. We've got to, we've got to be better than we ever have before, more productive than we ever have before, and we've got a tough couple of years, I imagine, for everybody. I predict the first couple of quarters of next year will be horrible, and the only way we can tackle that is by policymakers really making decisions, not hiding, coming out there and seeing if something will work. As long as if we're trying things, people would be a lot more accepting of that than us dithering and sitting around and not making decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we thank you so much for this great conversation. And I hope we can meet you in one of those amazing places that you showed us earlier in the evening.
Definitely.
And yeah. And Lucy, do you want to tell the audience about next week?
Next week is I think you're
We're going to be,
introducing you're
we're going to,
introducing the theme next week. It's public markets, isn't it? With
yes.
Stephen Davies from the Place Solutions Group, who was one of the co-founders of Project for Public Spaces, and Christy Daniel, Livable Cities Program for Healthbridge.
Yeah. I
You'll
think we're going to
explain
kind
what
of pick off a lot from this conversation of productive city because
I think so.
public markets are
Mm.
crucial to a productive city. And I think they've been doing a ton of great work around that. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And I hope all of you continue to stay safe. Stay tuned to the programming of Urban Manifesto every week. And we will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank